This is Company Breakdowns from Turpentine, a deep dive on a compelling tech company's strengths, TAM, business model, and potential for market domination. Today's episode discusses the complex landscape of digital identity verification and fraud prevention as Lorenzo Bartolini sits down with Eli Wachs, CEO of Footprint. Wachs explains how his company addresses the growing sophistication of identity fraud through portable identity infrastructure, enabling secure user onboarding for financial services.
All right, so welcome to another episode of Company Breakdowns. I'm particularly excited about this one. We've got Eli Wachs on the podcast, who's the founder and CEO of Footprint. Excellent company, which I've been following for a while, which raised by index, and it's enabling secure and frictionless user onboarding with just basically 5 lines of code as they advertise it. We'll see how much truth there is to it, but we're excited to jump into it. And Eli, why don't you give us a quick intro, and then we'll learn all about there is to know about the wild world of identity infrastructure.
Amazing. Lorenzo, really appreciate you having me. I've been excited for this one. I'm Eli. My background maybe isn't the most exciting. I grew up in Philadelphia, so I'm a struggling 76ers fan. I'm currently, at least when recording this, taking great joy in watching the Knicks lose. Normally, my friends from New York watch me watch the Sixers lose, and it's not fun. And I am having a ton of fun just sending bing bong gifs and being on the other side. But I was molded.
You can't reverse it.
I have been. It's been great. And now, for the viewers who I haven't lost, I grew up in Philly. From a young age, I was always super passionate about technology. I read a book in high school called Abundance. It's from the founder of X Prize. They do big $10 million competitions to get people to solve crazy things. And I was really inspired, sent the founder a cold email. He took pity on me and replied, and ended up spending the rest of my time in high school building a high school version of X Prize. So similar ideas and concepts. It started in Philly, spread across the country, a bit internationally. I followed that passion for tech out to Stanford. My freshman year there, started a company to track flu strains to recommend lockdowns to prevent pandemics. If you're looking for very niche people to blame COVID on, feel free to blame my lack of fortitude. And after I got really interested in privacy, right around the time of the 2016 election, the Cambridge Analytica scandal, and I just got very obsessed with the idea of figuring out how would you put people in control of their data. This idea that Google was the best predictor in the world of who would get Parkinson's. And I almost was more upset with what they didn't do with our data and what they did with it. So spent the rest of my time in school researching that, graduated, worked at a venture fund called General Atlantic, a lot of our work there across security, privacy, identity, and I'm sure as we'll discuss, thought there had to be a better way. And that really led to starting Footprint. We're now in year 4. We've raised $20 million from funds like QED and Index. We work with companies like FIS, Nuvei, Yield Street, Aperture, and then on the side, I do stand-up comedy.
That's awesome. I have a friend who runs a show. We'll have to get you on the stage. But before we get into jokes, I'd love to just splay out the identity infrastructure landscape. There's a lot that goes into my digital identity. It can mean a lot of things, from a personal login to an enterprise use case, with obviously varying levels of importance if I'm logging into my Crunchyroll account to watch the latest season of Attack on Titan, or if I'm logging in to fulfill my company's payroll. So those are wildly different use cases which still fall under this world. So how do you kind of reconcile all this into a single platform, or do you find that there's more opportunities in one space versus another?
It's a great question. I think at the top, there's a lot of opportunity, and as a result, there's a lot of competition. I don't think there's a bad thing. You obviously have to build different if you're not the first mover, but it's pretty nice when if we execute really, really well, to use really, really bad vocabulary, there is $700 million of revenue already out there, $500 million, enough that there can be multiple public companies. And so I think that's the first thing. The second is, you're right, as we begin to nerd out about identity, there are a lot of different parts of it. It's very different for the identity that you're using to sign into Okta, which would be more IAM. So that's you're part of a company and they want to make sure they know what you're signing into. Not the world we play in, yet I chose to lead with it for fun. Much more the world we play in is you normally as a person are signing up for something that's going to involve a high degree of trust or that's going to involve the movement of money. So for example, you are opening a bank account. You're applying for a loan. You are a merchant and you're onboarding people who are going to be paying you. You're a marketplace for cars. People are going to rent cars or rent apartments. These are all things that you can now do online, and you have been able for maybe the last, call it 10 to 15 years, to different degrees, bank accounts longer. And that's really where we come in. And the idea is that this is something that really impacts all of us. There are different numbers. The one you'll most commonly see is a Javelin study from 2024 that about 42 million US adults were victims of identity fraud in 2023. So that's pretty much 1 in 5 adults. More broadly, it's thought that somewhere between $30 to $50 billion is lost a year due to fraud. AI is definitely playing an increased role of that. When you have deepfakes, it's much easier to create synthetic identities, and we can get into what that is. We can also get on a really fun geopolitical rabbit hole that I love around how through many things of events, the former mafia of Macau was no longer allowed to offer loans to Chinese people to go and gamble in Macau. So they kind of fled to this triangle in the Laos, Myanmar, Thai border, and they started pig farming, and then Xi Jinping supported the junta, and through many events, they now do a lot more pig farming in the US over the last 2 years. So we can get into that if we want to. But it's a big space, and it really is this idea around how do we make sure that the people who we're onboarding are the people who they say they are, and we can trust them.
Well, okay, I think that's a great question. So, from pig farming juntas to your average enterprise user, like, what does the customer actually look like? Obviously, the tech capabilities have been changing and getting more advanced. Does that mean that the user is much more sophisticated? What does that mean for like the product roadmap, either for footprint or just as you look at where the industry is going to go? What's going to be the standard table stakes in 10 years versus, today or even 5 years ago?
Yeah, and I guess to be clear, from a compliance perspective, we do not sell to the pig farming juntas. We try to block
We'll put that
them
in bold
from,
in the
from
description.
Access. Yeah, we just want to be... We stand for many things at Footprint. One we do not stand for is enabling pig farming juntas. In terms of the sophistication of customers, I think it has gone up for a couple of reasons. One is that anytime you take an industry where, as we said at the beginning, there's a lot of revenue on the table, very large companies that don't have products there, I think will naturally begin to wonder why not, and is that something they should build? So for me, the first thing is you need to build something good enough that when a really large company with distribution says this is differentiated enough that we're willing to work with you. And a big part of when you look at Footprint's go-to-market, especially over the last year, has been working with really some of the largest enterprises across banking, across lending, to help enable this. The next is, going back to the pig farming juntas, fraudsters are getting a lot more sophisticated. When you think about, say, synthetic identities, synthetic's one of the fastest growing fraud in the US. It probably accounts for maybe 20% of credit losses at some lenders. Take that, and then we'll pause. And in document fraud, Onfido put out a report that close to between like 60 and 80% of rise of document-related fraud. And I bring these up in that these are because fraudsters are getting more sophisticated. Fraudsters have no red tape, they have no bureaucracy, and it's a full-time job. And you may not think it's a noble full-time job, but it's a full-time job nonetheless. And that means now with AI models, people often ask, what are we doing with AI? And they're very unsexy things at the end of the day companies are facing to do with fraud. It's really around automating manual review, which is important for our customers, but it's less sexy. Fraudsters, by contrast, have very sexy use cases for AI. They're using it to more quickly generate believable images. Synthetic identities, people hear that term, let me unpack that maybe. A synthetic identity essentially is the bureaus in the US, so we don't have a direct source of KYC information. We would like to build that in a way.
Yeah, and maybe I'll interrupt you there. So, there's a lot of these terms. So you were just defining KYC. We're talking about authentication. Like, maybe this is where you were going, but like, what does identity even mean to you in this sense? And let's just like splay that out and in the context of exactly where you were going.
Yeah, identity, it's when we started Footprint 2021, 2022, we spoke a lot about portable identity. To me, back then at least, portable identity meant the building block had to be having your name, date of birth, address, SSN, bound to a passkey, which is kind of like your Face ID on your phone. It's a 502 WebAuthn. To me, that was the building block. As we've evolved and grown, and now we do things such as bank linking or secure credit card vault, I increasingly view portable identities as needing also to have either like that card or that bank account to like further increase the fidelity. They're different tiers. What this all goes to is it's also a made-up term. I will not have the hubris to say we invented portable identity. We definitely did not. I wrote an essay a couple years ago that I published about the history of people building portable identity. With that said, it is a made-up term. And there are often times where there have been companies that have started since that have tried to do portable identity. There are really large companies that have started trying to do portable identity. And I enjoy looking at the copy, and I'll sometimes speak with our investors and say, what do you think here? What do you think there? And I'll often have to remind us, portable identity is a made-up term. It's KPIs for us. But consumers are impacted by that. Consumers are impacted by people trying to steal their identity. To me, portable identity is how we block it. Now, what does that mean? For me, it's a simple math equation because I'm not smart enough to do complex math equations. And it's as follows. There is an infinite amount of identities in the world. And we just spoke about how with AI, there will be 2 times infinite amount of fake identities in the world, which is not a real number. You can't multiply infinity. Like I said, I'm not going to do the most complex math here.
But it will be a larger infinity. I agree with that one.
Larger infinity. And what I would say, it will be a larger number of usable fake identities. There was a lot of slop out there in the past. They've gotten much better now. What we want to do is change the math equation. And we want to say there are 2 people on this podcast right now. We know how many people live in the United States. We know how many people should have my name, date of birth, address, SSN tied to a phone number. And the game that we're essentially playing is saying, instead of looking for every last fraudster, which we'll never do. I hate to be the bearer of bad news. We'll never do that. None of our competitors will ever do that. Nobody's going to find every last fraudster. Impossible. Conversely, if we can say the moment a second Eli shows up with my information, that empirically one of us has to be lying, well, we've created a much better mousetrap. And that, to me, is what portable identity means. KYC is more of a compliance term. It means know your customer. It dates back to the Patriot Act. So it really dates back to 9/11. And it came from this idea of banks, if they're opening accounts and moving money, need to know the people who they're doing that on behalf of. So KYC is you need to know your customer. You need to know, are they someone you can trust? That's what KYC means. Synthetic identity is the bureaus have the identity, the data they're given. So if I get a credit card with American Express and I pay my bill on time, American Express will report to the bureau that Eli has been paying, my credit score will go up. We know this. Now, there are some companies out there that use different point solutions to verify identity. So they may verify my name, date of birth, address with one provider, and they may verify my SSN with another. People will create accounts using maybe my real first name, last name, date of birth, and a fake social security number. There's something called a CPN, which are also a fake social security number. And they'll be a good actor on that account. They'll pay their balance. But what they've done is they've now nurtured a synthetic, a fake identity in the bureau, and they can start using to actually commit fraud.
Wow.
So this is where synthetic is. And for us, the way we think about identity is we want to holistically verify the identity. So we want to say essentially we're a hosted flow. I guess we're this far and I haven't really said what we do. We give companies such as banks, auto companies, investment platforms, the embedded UX to collect information, securely verify it, and store it. And for us, being on the front end is very important. The analogy we like to say is if you walked into a bank to open an account, you'd presumably talk to a teller. And they would look at you and they'd say, are you fidgeting? What wouldn't happen, and let me know if you find a bank that does this because I'd like to open an account, would be you walk in and a teller gets blindfolded and they open a burlap sack and you put in your passport and they go to the back to verify you. That'd be very strange, and we laugh at that. And I tell this story and we all smile and we joke, but that's what most identity verification looks like online. You type in your information to a form and it gets sent via API to a bunch of data providers. That's crazy. Nobody should be okay with that. That's why a lot of fraud happens. We're looking at how are you entering it? Are you typing with confidence? Are you copying and pasting your information? We're then verifying it with different vendors from both like KYC, the database, and synthetic. So just because this exists in a bureau, should it? And then we're leveraging device signals. We're using app clips and passkeys to deterministically count in a similar way to Spotify and Netflix how many identities are on your device. And in that world, we're then doing a couple things going back to the math equation we spoke about earlier. One is we're changing the P&L of a fraudster. So if we're saying AI makes it a lot easier for fraudsters to open accounts, we are saying you now need to spend another $700, $1,000 to get another smartphone to go through this. You can create accounts with flip phones, but we'll trigger more signals. So we're one, making it more expensive to commit fraud. And then two, by being a vaulting provider and creating a centralized database here, we're beginning to play the math game of seeing these are 2 people who have the same identity that can exist. And we see that every day at Footprint, which are really unique issues to deal with. Because then you need to figure out, which was always the thought exercise in the beginning, which I said this would be a privilege to get to. Well, who actually is Eli? And that becomes interesting. Then we can do different step-ups to try to figure out who is who.
We'll get back to the conversation in a moment after a word from our sponsors. What does the future hold for business? Ask 9 experts and you'll get 10 answers. It's a bull market. It's a bear market. Rates will rise or fall. Can someone invent a crystal ball? Until then, over 41,000 businesses have future-proofed their business with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 cloud ERP, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one fluid platform. With one unified business management suite, there's one source of truth, giving you the visibility and control you need to make quick decisions. With real-time insights and forecasting, you're peering into the future with actionable data. When you're closing the books in days and not weeks, you're spending less time looking backwards and more time on what's next. If I had needed this product, it's what I'd use. Whether your company is earning millions or even hundreds of millions, NetSuite helps you respond to immediate challenges and seize your biggest opportunities. Speaking of opportunity, download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/102. The guide is free to you at netsuite.com/102. netsuite.com/102. So it's a new year, 2025. And one of the recurring questions I've already been receiving is, should I start my own business? Can I do it all on my own? Now more than ever, my answer is a resounding yes, with tools like today's sponsor, Shopify. It's never been easier to start pursuing your dreams. Shopify makes it simple to create your brand, open for business, and get your first sale. No coding or design skills required. They also help with the details like shipping, taxes, payments, and have social media tools that connect all your channels and create shoppable posts, allowing you to focus on the important stuff, like growing your business. What happens if you don't act now? Will you regret it? What if someone beats you to the idea? Don't kick yourself when you hear this again in a year because you didn't do anything now. Established in 2025 has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/momentofzen, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/momentofzen to start selling with Shopify today. Shopify.com/momentofzen.
Well, I guess that's actually a perfect dovetail into what I was going to ask, which I think you started going into, which is like, obviously a lot of the problems aren't exactly new to this decade or century even, but I was watching all these outputs with VO3 the past few days. And I was like, man, I'm totally getting scammed when I'm 65, even like 20 years earlier. So how, like, you know, you've outlined some of the ways that we can do of adding the extra permutation so that the scammer now has to go through that new set of steps, but that's just a little bit of a higher wall, but then they'll go get the higher ladder. What's the silver bullet? Or is it just about continuing to add new steps and making it increasingly difficult forever?
I don't think there's a silver bullet, but when you look at the history of the space, you see a history of point solutions, and then you see aggregators who orchestrate together. And this makes sense going back to saying there's a lot of revenue in the space. There are a lot of companies who made a lot of money here solving very specific issues. And I think you can build successful companies that way. I'm not saying that we are the fully vertically integrated platform that can do everything. But I do think that it will take something more like this. We say we're an infrastructure company. What I mean by that is we talked about vaulting, but we also do authentication. So when we bind that passkey, we're both getting fraud signals, but we're also then able to recognize that the same person who created an account is the same person who's signing back in. We've rolled out this year something that we call interventions. And the idea behind interventions is we looked at what are some of the best tools that neobanks like Nubank and Monzo and Revolut had built. And we aggregate them together and began offering them as technology. So for example, if you want to send a wire, we can check to see if you're on your home Wi-Fi network. If you want to send a wire and you're out of country and you can't be on your home Wi-Fi network, we will waterfall to you have to have a trusted contact to verify this. So I think there are things like that you can do, which is leveraging the fact that we know this is the person who created the account, and now we're having a secondary attestation that we think they're actually acting of their own volition. Not all fraud's very different. When we go back to our pig butchering juntas, that's different. There's been a huge rise of, you may have gotten text saying that you didn't pay a toll There's like fraud rings of pretending to be hospitals. A lot of information is public, and that's why there won't per se be like that silver bullet. But we do think more broadly that by being more holistic, we can both look at the user journey throughout, so not just at moment of onboarding, but at re-authentication. And by being the vault and seeing credit card information, bank account information, what we've seen, which we didn't even expect when we began doing this earlier this year on the bank linking side, is we can now look and say, these were two people who both passed KYC but are using the same bank account. That's suspicious. Maybe this is a muling operation, which is essentially, best example is a cartel will get people who are good to set up bank accounts so they can launder money through it. We can say maybe this was a leaked account. You can start getting into interesting questions. But to me, I think it's tough to stop fraud with very specific point solutions. They're really important. They play a really important role. And we would not exist without partners that we work with. And I don't say point solution in a derogatory way. I more so mean that you need to be able to stitch these together.
Yeah, absolutely. The interoperability of the different solutions and having the unifying platform is what actually creates this like, it's truly a web of security that you basically have to find that one small hole, which of course, as you say, there's no silver bullet, but as you keep plugging different ways to validate, then of course that builds the more secure footprint that you're going towards. I think like one of the apparent differentiators that you started talking about that I'd love to dig a little bit more into one of these, what does a word mean to Eli, is like when we talk about trust. I think this is increasingly important in all AI as we see just what is going on under the hood, the importance of transparency. How does that become even more emphasized when it comes to identity and security? And how do you guys make sure that at the end of the day, your customers maintain trust and footprint?
Once again, I'll bring it back to security. People thought it was pretty weird when we started the company. When I say we, my co-founder Alex is a brilliant cryptographer. He went to MIT. His master's advisor was the inventor of the zero knowledge proof. He started a mobile authentication company. I took an online class on Coursera with Dan Bonet from Stanford when I was bored during COVID. So he's much more qualified in this than I am. But for us, we thought security was core for a couple of reasons. One, I spoke about a few minutes ago, which is by being the vaulting company, there are tactical advantages. If you have permissible use, you can catch duplicate fraud. That's how you also make identity portable, right? You don't want to make identity portable if you're not a strong system. For us, the next thing was when you study how does fraud happen, first-party fraud's a big bucket, which is I open an account in my name and I commit fraud. That's very difficult to prevent. The next buckets are often my identity got leaked somewhere and somebody took it and created an account, so you need strong security. Or my account got taken over. Maybe I was phished, social engineering. That's why authentication is important. So for us, that's why we say we're an infrastructure company that does security and authentication, will apply KYC. Because if you're not doing those, you're not solving the actual top of funnel issue. People talk about top funnel sales. We think about top funnel for fraudsters, right? And then getting to your question, that's how I think we've built trust with large enterprises. Because it may sound strange, but when you're a 3-year-old company, or at the time we were like a 2-year-old company, being a $50 billion public company. And when they were asking about how they could trust us, what became nice is when their security team got really excited that they could start leveraging Nitro enclaves. And I think that's how we always thought about security, which is we're giving them trust because they are now able to tell their end customers they're protecting their data in a very secure way. We just published a case study with a customer of ours, awesome company called Trade, in the construction payroll space and contractor space. And I thought it was pretty cool. They published our case study as just an internal case study about how they protect user data. And to me, that's really important. The fact that our security gives our customers and customers trust. And if we're making our customers look good, we're making them successful. And I think we're growing that trust. At the end of the day, you say in sales, your job should be the people who buy your product get promoted. More broadly, your company should be able to do well because they're using your product. And for me, none of our competitors, I always like, and we have a wins channel in the company, and I'll often post sentences that our customers say about us that you couldn't replace us with. And one of that is we love using Footprint to securely sort of data when we onboard people. Because I know no other KYC company could say that. I think that's how we really thought about building that trust.
We'll get back to the conversation in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Every time I hop on the 101 freeway in SF, I look up at the various tech billboards and think, damn, Turpentine should definitely be up there, and I bet I'm not alone. In a world of endless scrolling and ad blockers, sometimes the most powerful way to reach people is in the real world. That's where AdQuick comes in. The easiest way to book out-of-home ads, like billboards, vehicle wraps, and airport displays, the same way you would order an Uber. Started by Instacart alums, AdQuick was born from their own personal struggles to book and measure ad success. AdQuick's audience targeting, campaign management, and analytics bring the precision and efficiency of digital to the real world. Ready to get your brand the attention it deserves? Visit adquick.com today to start reaching your customers in the real world. Again, that's adquick.com.
Do you find that as you're selling into these new contracts, a lot of folks are just like, frankly, under-equipped?
Candidly, I wish it was more greenfield. I would actually say our sales are, most companies have solutions. Now, the question becomes how effective the solutions are. Yeah, there are very few. I think you get into a world where measuring ROI becomes somewhat tricky in that fraud is not a leading indicator per se. Once you have fraud, you should have plugged the issue before. But that means that in a weird way, fraud and security are somewhat similar in that you need to preemptively spend on something to avoid a counterfactual, right? So I think that becomes somewhat difficult. It's also why I say we do better selling to larger companies because they've experienced pain. I love working with startups, with YC companies, with Series A companies. But if you haven't had a fraud attack yet, if you haven't had an issue where it's our onboarding conversions so low that we're actually missing out on 2,000 people a month, 10,000 people a month, you're not going to care enough. So that's why we do better, I think, with the larger companies when we can start to quantify that out. I also say we're technically in an ARPU business, which sounds weird, but because we're on the front end, if we can grow your conversion from, say, 85 to 92%, if you're a small company that doesn't matter that much, you have more pressing needs. If you're onboarding 100,000 people a month, that's actually a lot. So when you multiply that out from an ARPU perspective, that's several $1 million of LTV that we're actually adding a year for companies. So that's the other thing when we think about who are we selling to. You need to solve needs and you need to make a business case.
That's really interesting. I wonder, do you find that is going to become just like, at the end of the day, in a steady state market as all these AI tools get developed, is it just going to be like fighting on the margin for the extra, percent KPI security? Or is there going to be, again, like some kind of more longstanding stickiness or moat to the end product that ends up winning here? Or maybe, as you say, there isn't one and there's room for 5 or 6 kind of similar products that are all, improving security, but for what it's worth, fighting at the margin.
So I think the company that should win should be one that builds centralized portable identity. I think and I'd love to say that will be us. I think it will be us. I hope it will be us. But if that is us, if we're the first company that has 150 million portable identities, we don't get to run to Times Square and hit a buzzer and everybody stops building, right? Other companies will presumably say, I'd like to have 150 million portable identities. And not all networks are created equal. To me, though, the game theory likely outcome should be, and I hope is, even if this would be worse for our value, that maybe 3 companies, maybe 4, hit that level of network saturation. All of our North Star should be identity fraud losses in the US from identity theft goes down. Currently has gone up every year for the last however many years the internet's existed. Our goal should be for that to start going down. And I think how many companies can succeed in that will really depend on, there will be, I think, slight specification. Maybe somebody becomes much stronger in lending, somebody becomes stronger in rentals, similar to payment processors, where there are differentiations between Stripe and Adyen and others, but you could probably see their customers trade if you weren't trading margin, etc. And then that really just becomes which product bundle ends up being part of it. If it's
you mentioned lending and processing. Like, what are the big buckets that you kind of see, if they were to form the pillars of like semi-specialized platform providers? How would you break that out? I'm curious.
Really, the way I'd more broadly say it is networks that benefit solely internally versus externally. And what I mean by that is if you're in a space where you feel that your competitor, you don't have a huge moat, you're going to get more value by cross-selling your users onto products 2, 3, and 4, and you won't want it to be easy for your competitors to one-click onboard you. So you may not want to participate in a network, even though I would disagree with your math. And then there are going to be industries where it's a point of time. If you're applying to rent an apartment, the apartment rental company may want to have a network of verified renters, but after you applied, it's not that they're going to lose you to apply to rent another apartment. For them, there's more value in being able to one-click you to external parties for things such as renter's insurance or ways to pay for your rent. To me, that's actually a trickier use case per se, because it's much more dynamic application of SIPs for the different parties. I would say that's actually an area that we're better at. We're better at being able to take a verified identity from company A and bring it to company B, where you're going to have a different rule set. Versus right now, if you pause time, Clear has way more identities than us, just because of how they started. They're much more rigid. So Clear wouldn't be good at use case B, but if you're a company in use case A today, Clear may be who you call, because they're going to have more identities top of funnel for that onboard.
To translate some of that, it kind of sounds like, okay, we've got, today it's very appealing to think of an identity data mode as being like, okay, this is why Clear is going to go forward. But I think it's actually much more interesting, as you say, like the way that these use cases actually splay out is not necessarily on like who's got the most product, point solutions to plug into whatever your security means, but actually the flows themselves are important for the way that identity gets verified and how the end user business actually wants it to flow through their own, processes and systems.
Exactly. At the end of the day, first off, a bank probably needs to approve the process. So I've seen banks not approve another very large company that's tried to build portable identity because the banks don't believe that the way they reuse data is a high enough fidelity. Now, that doesn't surprise me. I know how they do it. And I think that's not the worst call by the banks, given the current regulatory environment. So that's the other thing to keep in mind. Going back to something we said at the beginning, portable identity is a made-up term. Banking laws are a real law. So it's going to depend on who's interpreting.
Very much. Yeah, that's really interesting. I'd love to dive in more, but I want to switch topics here to learn a little bit more about footprint in a qualitative sense, because I think it's rare on the show that we get someone who is successful early, but still early in the growth process. So I'd just love to hear about Footprint's founding story. You mentioned with your co-founder how you obviously had interest in security coming out of GA and just earlier, even before college. But how did you go from 0 to 1 and frankly to the first raise? And what were the notable things worth mentioning, either upsides, downsides, what you'd want to tell to other aspiring founders at a similar stage?
I think Alex is my co-founder, and Alex had sold his last company to Akamai. He built out their mobile MFA team. I think we met and we really bonded over having a shared vision of portable identity, which we've now discussed. And we're both very flexible on how to get there. Even at the beginning, we knew there were 3 broad components we would have to build over the first year. And we were somewhat flexible in the order we would build them based off the order of how we hired the team. And that luckily things came together in time. I think where things maybe start getting a bit more interesting is when you talk about 0 to 1, we've spoken about trust. How do you get those early customers to trust you? Really good advice I was given by Shardul, who led our seed round from Index, was that your first customers will not be the ones to ask you how they can trust you. They'll be the people who don't even think to ask themselves why they should trust you because they believe in your vision that much. And I think that's why when we look at our early customers, they're some of the ones who I think use Footprint for the right ways. And what I mean by that is whoever uses your product, they're technically using the same product. So maybe they bought it because their friend bought it, which isn't a wrong way, but I guess it's less of a pure way. And when you look at the early Footprint customers, they're people who said back when data security maybe was less on the forefront, it's really important to me that we have security as part of our onboarding. Or it's really important to me that security ties to KYC because I'm going to be able to leverage this to grow my ARPUs because I'll be able to onboard users from product 1 to product 2 and 3 more quickly. And I think it's really cool when we look at some of our larger customers that started at the beginning, that's very much reflected in their buying journey. I think then to go a level deeper of that sounds nice, Eli, how did that actually happen? I don't think there's any silver bullet again, other than you just have to irrationally believe and understand that your job is not to get every customer. Your job of your big incumbent competitor is to have 100% gross retention. So they have 100 customers, they need to keep 100. Your job is to get 10 of them. That'd be a really good first year, which means that in a really good first year, you're going to hear 90 no's. And you just have to never hear the no's as no's. There's a good saying in sales that you lose a deal 3 times before you get it. So I often just view it as a check down of, okay, we're only 2 sales cycles away from getting this customer to use footprint. And then I think the last thing is balancing being, you'll get a lot of advice from VCs, which is well-intentioned. One thing that you'll hear is you don't want to become a dev shop. And I understand why investors give you this advice. They have seen portfolio companies become dev shops for big companies, and it hasn't worked out. I'm of the belief, though, we don't have the luxury to not be a dev shop for the 3 $50 billion companies that want to work with us right now. We have the luxury of saying, okay, it's been 6 months, nothing's happened, we got to stop. But sign me up to be their dev shop for 6 months and see if it goes somewhere. Because some of our most successful, you get a triple whammy in a way. 1, you have revenue. 2, you get branded revenue. It's one thing, I know companies that have a lot of revenue, it's like, where'd that come from? And it's like, oh, I've never heard of that company. But when people have heard of the company, you'll get more legitimacy. And in 3, if it works for them, you then get to go to their competitors. So to me, I think early on, we were pretty thoughtful in what companies, I don't think when we were a seed company, we were ready to partner with Fortune 500 companies. But I think we were ready to partner with mid-market companies that we thought were really smart. And we were willing to be a dev shop, in air quotes, for them if we thought the product that they wanted to build was something that we would more broadly want to build. And I think we're pretty thoughtful in that. If we had said yes to the wrong companies, that would have been a mistake. But I fully don't shy away from the idea of you, of course, build custom features and tools for those early customers. Because one of the few things that you have is the fact that the other companies later along have too many investors telling them they can't be a dev shop. So use the advantages that you have at the beginning.
So it kind of sounds like advice to founders, 1, irrational belief above all. And I've heard that same advice from other equally successful CEOs. You're fortunately not in lonely company there. And if your customers are large enough and aligned enough with what your end goal is, do not shy away from being a dev shop, because at the end of the day, that's what builds a great business for the best customers. And I guess the hardest part is just getting those largest customers to take that first call with you. But once you're in, build.
I'll maybe add, because the first one's tough to implement. Like it's tough to wake up and meditate on having more rational belief. I've been told by many people who I've spoken with on advice that I'm the anti-YC with my advice. And the next thing I'll add to the list of be a dev shop, apparently YC hates, but I fully stand by, win on pricing. Every investor you have is going to hate it when you're like, I'm undercutting my competitor. Great. You got revenue. You have a case study. You proved your ROI. I have never regretted the deal that we've won on price. And I've only regretted deals that I refuse to win on price. And to me, this is an ego thing. At the end of the day, your product, the worth of it is a figment of the imagination. And you're like, oh, I'm not going to discount this, or I really believe that we've built a better product. Who cares? You don't have the luxury. If you're a public company with 200 A's, sure, they don't have to discount it. But at the beginning, win on price. Because even when you raise a Series A, even when you raise a Series B, it's on revenue, but it's more so about, have we spoken to customers that are blown away by your product? And if you discounting your product gives you more chances of customers that will give glowing reviews of, no, I would be so upset if this product went away, take it, run with it. I was speaking to a founder of a pre-seed company. He's trying to sell to a customer of ours. And I said, oh, I'm happy to put in a good word. I like what you're building. What's the holdup? He says, they won't pay us the platform fee. And I go, scrap the platform fee. Scrap the platform fee. We don't need to show this. And I get why investors say that you need to charge for the value you're creating. You will. just because you discount something today, if they're really happy a year from now, they'll pay a year from now. But how can they know? How can they, going back to your question of trust you to pay for that now? All these companies have been burned by vendors who didn't deliver. So be a vendor that delivers and they'll reward you.
Yes. Solve against the type 2 error and build what they need. Yeah, I'd love to spend the last bit of time just talking about, given we've had this great dialogue, I'd love to just get your sense on how you see Footprint's company culture. Today, going forward, it's still a young company. You're at the helm of it, and I think there's a notable shift in dynamics in cultures of both old and young companies, I'd say post-COVID, and obviously you guys started kind of at that transition point. So I would love to see how you and your leadership team kind of envision that going forward, or if it's just like, all hands on deck. That's what matters.
I think culture is created more so by hiring than by something you're actively doing each week. I would be totally lying if I got on here and I talked about the team building exercises we do each week. I do think, though, culture is a result of screening for traits qualitatively and quantitatively. An example I'll give is I'm a huge nerd. We didn't get to fully unpack pig farming juntas, but maybe when I reshare this, I'll drop a link to a really good video on it. I talk about maritime infrastructure, and I have never hired someone because they like maritime infrastructure. I'm not going to just do that to like self-filter for me. But I do think intellectual curiosity is one of the most important things. I say intellectual curiosity and empathy, because I think regardless of if you're on sales or eng, those are the things you're going to need to be really successful in my mind, in addition to obvious things. So I do have an informal role, which we've done, and I've never regretted, which is if you're a front-end engineer and you have read the book The Power Broker, I will hire you, no questions asked. The Power Broker, for those who don't know, is one of the longest books ever written. It's like 1,600 pages about Robert Moses, who is an urban planner in New York. And to me, it just shows a dedication of curiosity to learn. And why have I brought all of this up when you ask about culture? Because I think we've created a culture where people are genuinely curious about, what does our customer do? How's this company impacted by fraud? Or, we're now at a point of our company where compliance is involved in not just product. What would be their mindset? I think that's where intellectual curiosity comes into play. And I think empathy, tougher to screen for. I think you mostly have to use reference calls for that. We're a hybrid company. If you're in New York, we're in office every day. I'm in New York. But we started remote, and we're always going to hire amazing people wherever they are. I think empathy is super important there from a company culture perspective of trusting your teammates. And to me, once again, you can't teach empathy. You can hire people who are empathetic. And I think that also comes from being really thoughtful about how you do calls. We have a rule, which we've learned, I think, not the hard way, but we've learned is we will not hire someone we haven't met them in person now. We think it's really important to see how do you treat others? How do you treat a waiter at a restaurant? I just think those are things that you have to try to screen for, and then culture should come from that.
I couldn't agree more, though I will say you've hurt yourself because now everyone's going to come in with a fully mastered copy of Power Broker, and you're going to have to add some more restrictions to your automatic hire rule.
I'm not concerned. It's a long book. I don't if
You'll
you
stand by it.
I'll fully stand by it. If you hear this and you look up Footprint and you're like, I want to get a job here, and you're a front engineer and you read it and we can talk about the book, I will totally give you a work trial.
On that note, I am happy to make any and all referrals to Footprint for those that come to me with the aforementioned criteria. Eli, any final thoughts on this that you want to leave us with? I think this was incredibly informative. I mean, as all our conversations are, but close it out for us. What are your final thoughts on identity?
I'll also do final thoughts on company building. My final thoughts on identity, perhaps, are people will call me and say, should I be worried? And I have good and bad news for you. The answer is probably. I'm sorry, that's the bad news. The maybe good news is there's not a lot you can do. And I don't say that to scare you. I do say that to say the things that you can do are use passkeys where you can use passkeys. Use 2FA when you can use 2FA. Don't click on links. Don't click on emails. Call people, and make sure that the phone number tracks back. At the end of the day, if we were to say what are the best things we can do for identity verification, Revolut recently introduced it, they will only call you through their app. So if you get a call from somebody and they say they're with Revolut, you say it's not them because they'll only call you through the app. So as weird as it sounds, a lot of the best things I can think about for the future of identity are actually more analog things. Like it's how would we have verified people before the internet? That's probably still going to be the
It
best.
like kind of sounds gimmicky, but it's like if you get enough gimmicks going, then that's identity, right?
Totally. Which is to say also your identity is out there, but there are companies like us that are building tools to see, okay, so this is your identity, but it's stolen. It's like you can't do anything about your identity getting leaked. If you live in America, your identity's been leaked. There's nothing you can do about that. What you can do is make sure that, one, you have some type of credit monitoring, and then two, you're really kind of protecting your accounts and passwords, etc. And hopefully footprint creates shareholder value, which is my biggest goal in life, and we protect your identity. I think then for company building, my final words would just be to enjoy it. I do think it's a privilege to do really hard things and learn in real time and make mistakes. And I do feel extremely lucky to live in a country where they'll give 20-year-olds, I wasn't 20 when I started a company, but people in that age range, just millions of dollars to try and do crazy things. It comes with pressure, it comes with responsibility, and it should. You're now a responsible steward of people's money, people's jobs, people's healthcare, all that's very real. I've definitely found that it's very easy when you're starting a company to live many years ahead in the dreams and what you're going to do and all of the success. And dreams of perfection really are the thief of joy. And I think that the more you just wake up and you smile at the fact that you're doing something that you of a couple of years ago dreamt to do, will just make you enjoy it. Every day when I walk to work, I just say to myself that how much I'm enjoying this and how lucky and happy I feel to be doing it. And I think it's really my wish for most founders and employees, anybody working at a startup, to not just think about the future, but enjoy the present.
What a wonderful philosophical piece of advice to end on. So just as it's been your privilege to continue building Footprint, it's been my privilege to learn about it. And I look forward to seeing your Netflix special when it comes out. But until then, we'll just have to lead out this episode. Thanks so much, Eli.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Company Breakdowns. Make sure you're subscribed on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. Let us know in the comments or reviews what companies you want us to deep dive on next. Company Breakdowns is a show from Turpentine, the network behind Moment of Zen, Turpentine VC, Turpentine Finance, and Request for Startups.